What up guys, and welcome back. Today we are working on a 2017 Chevy Silverado, and we're going to be installing a Zone 4.5-inch lift kit. Before we go ahead and get the truck jacked up, start getting the wheels off of it, I want to go over the parts that come with the kit. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I don't really know much about this kit, but because it was actually supplied by the guy that we're doing it for, but it looks like a pretty nice kit. I mean, it comes with the spindles, it comes with the cross members, because you actually have to drop the diff down, and I believe you have to cut the factory cross member. I haven't really looked into this too much, so we're going to kind of figure out what needs to be done before we start digging into it. But these are the cross members that you have to install that kind of drops it down. These are, I believe, the spacers that go above the coilovers. There's some spacers for the CV axles, because you actually increase the track width on these lifts. Some U-bolts, some other various brackets, a skid plate for the front diff, and a bunch of other stuff. So let's go ahead and get this truck jacked up, get the wheels off of it, and see what we're working with. Alright, so first thing we got to do here is go ahead and get the entire front suspension pulled out of the truck, because we got to separate the wheel bearing from the knuckle, because we're going to be replacing these steering knuckles, and we also have to pull the struts out so that we can put our strut spacers in, and we have to get our lower control arms out, because we have to make a modification to our front and rear cross members. So let's go ahead and get this thing all torn apart. So unfortunately, I forgot to bring home my axle nut socket. This is a 36mm axle nut socket. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna go and get one tomorrow. But in the meantime, we can go ahead. I'm just gonna unbolt the axle from the flange, and then we'll just pull the whole CV axle out and everything. That way we can kind of get everything apart. And then tomorrow, when we continue with it, we'll be able to separate the axle from the spindle, get the hub assembly off, and then transfer all of that to the new spindles. All right, so it's the next day. We actually ran to work and got my axle nut sockets, because you can't actually drop this steering knuckle down off the ball joint with the axle still in it. So we went ahead, we ran and grabbed our axle nut sockets late last night. So it's the next day. So let's continue taking this thing all apart. Alright, so now that we got the entire suspension pulled down on both sides, we got the rear cross member removed, sway bar removed, Now it's time to go ahead and pull our front differential down because there is a bracket that you need to cut off of that, and then we need to add, there is this bracket right here is actually going to bolt to the front differential, and then we're going to go ahead and bolt this to our front and rear drop cross members. And then there's another bracket on the existing, I believe, rear cross member on the truck that we need to make a cut on. So let's go ahead and get that differential out of there, and then we'll assess after that.
That's horrible.
Alright, so what we're going to do here is, obviously, in order to keep all of our axle angles pretty straight, we need to obviously drop the differential down. So what we have to do in order to do that, in order for the differential to clear where this cross member kind of flares out here, you have to make a cut. I think it's 3.5 inches from the end here. So you'll cut this off, and then we'll install the drop cross member, and that'll allow the differential to kind of sit down a couple inches. I guess it's what, another 4, I guess it's it would be the length of the lift, 4.5 inches.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go ahead and clean this up, make a mark 3.5 inches, and go ahead and whack this off. Make sure to always use a guard. Don't be like me. Alright, so now that we got this piece cut off, we went ahead and cleaned this all up so we have some nice fresh metal to weld to. And inside the kit, which I'm going to show you, is a piece of metal. They actually already have it cut for you, which is kind of nice. And it's going to set right on top of here, and we're going to go ahead and tack that in place and kind of tighten this up, give it some more structure, and it'll kind of just make it look good. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so inside the kit, they give you actually a piece of steel to go ahead and plate that section that we cut out in that pocket. It only comes with a chamfer on the one side, which I'm not really sure why. So we cut another chamfer, cleaned it all up. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing tacked into place and get it all welded up. Alright, so we did decide to read the directions, which is good. And it says to basically just whack this side of the ear off the diff. So we're going to cut this off and then clean this up real good. And then you cut 1 inch off this one. Is it 1 inch?
Yeah, inch from the center of this hole.
Okay, inch from the center of this hole. So basically just the edge of this. And I believe that's to basically clear the like the ear on the cross member. I guess we'll see once we get it in there, but I'm pretty sure they want you to cut that in order for this to clear that that ear that kind of hangs off the frame there. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. We're gonna cut this off flush, clean it up real good, and then we're gonna make a line here and cut that off, clean that up. Alright, next step is we're going to go ahead and cut these flanges off where they're kind of flared out, because whenever you put, I believe once you put the CV axle in, there's like a spacer that spaces it out, and I think it hits this ear, which is why they have you cut this off. So we're going to go ahead and cut this flush and clean that all up on both sides. And then we should be good to, we'll throw some undercoating on that metal now that it's cooled down. And then we should be good to go ahead and put the diff back up in the truck. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install these spacers. Now these are going to go in between the differential and the existing mounts that are up top. Because we're dropping the differential down, we need something to kind of make up that gap. So we're gonna go ahead and get these installed, and then I guess at that point we'll be ready to put the diff back up in the truck. Okay, so we got our differential spacers installed on both sides, and I actually lied. There's one more thing we have to do. We have to install the bracket that basically bolts to the diff, and then it ties the diff to the front and rear cross members. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're gonna go ahead and send this thing back up in the truck. Alright, so we got the diff in. So now it's time to get the cross members installed. And then I think we can put the front suspension back together. Alright, so we got our front and rear cross members installed. Got everything all tightened up. Next thing is going to be to get our differential skid plates installed. So we'll go ahead and do that. All right, so we got both control arms just kind of sitting there. Got the bolts through them. The next step is going to be to get the strut spacers on and then get the struts installed. And then I think what we're going to do after that is put the axle, bolt the axles up to the flanges and install the spacers in between those. And then what we'll do is go ahead and pull the control arm up and kind of get everything bolted in, get the struts bolted into the control arms, and then probably get our spindles put on. All right, so we got our struts installed. We got the CV axles mounted up to our differential flange. Got the control arm pulled up and bolted up. Now, next step is going to be to get the steering knuckle taken apart. We're going to remove the hub and the backing plate off of this knuckle, and then we're going to go ahead and install those on the new steering knuckles. So the next step, so that came apart super easy. Totally not used to that. Usually you gotta beat the living hell out of these things to get them apart, but we'll take it. So next step, they tell you to measure a ½ inch from this end in, and then cut basically diagonally across here. So we're basically gonna cut this little section off. I'm really honestly not sure why. Something it obviously gets in the way of something. We'll find out once we put it back on, but we're gonna go ahead and do that and then get it all assembled. Alright, so I forgot to mention it before I did it, but you have to cut a ½ inch off the inner tie rod end and then 5/8 of an inch off the outer tie rod end. I already cut the outer, so we're going to go ahead and put the, or I'm sorry, I already cut the inner. We're going to go ahead and put the outer in the vise, and then we're going to mark it and cut 5/8 of an inch off the end of the outer tie rod end. All right, so we got the front suspension all put back together. They give you some like holders to hold the brake line or the brake hose and the ABS wire in place. A new bracket to hold the brake hose. There's a spacer for the sway bar. It's all pretty straightforward stuff. It's just, you know, they give you a spacer and some longer bolts, and they give you a new sway bar link. So now we got that all put back together. We're gonna try and jack the truck up a little bit higher because obviously now the suspension's dropped down. So we need to jack the truck up to get the wheels back on, but we obviously don't have a lot of room left. So we're gonna have to do some finagling to get this thing up high enough to get the wheels back on it. So that should be interesting. So if anybody wants to get me something for Christmas, I wear a size 30 by 30 garage with 16-foot ceilings and at least one 10-foot post lift. All right, so we got the front all done. Looks a little goofy because he still has the stock size tires on it, but he does have some bigger tires that we're gonna be putting on it, I believe on Monday. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna back it out and flip it around, pull the back in, and get the wheels off that and start doing the back now. It actually wasn't too bad. We were able to jack it up and we still had some clearance in the top. It was not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. So we thought we were gonna have to let the air out of the tire so that it wasn't as high, but we should be good. Okay, so we got the truck flipped around. We got the back wheels off. What we need to do now is we're going to take our U-bolts out, take some of our brake line brackets off, because when you basically have to drop the rear diff down and install like a bigger block and longer U-bolts. So they also give you some brackets that are longer for the brake line, and I believe the ABS wires maybe. I'm not really sure, but first things first, let's get this all these brackets off, get these U-bolts off, and lower this diff down a couple inches. Alright guys, we got the back all buttoned up and this thing's a wrap. It looks pretty good. There's a few things we're gonna still have to do. We actually did 2-inch wheel spacers. Because he's running the factory wheels, we did have to do some wheel spacers, but the front like sticks out further than the rear because in the front, because we did the lift, it already pushes the track width out 1.5 inches, I think, or 1 5/8 inches. So we're gonna put some smaller wheel spacers in the front, probably 1/4 inch in the front, and that should look pretty good. And we might do some fender flares too. And then he's got some bigger tires, like I said, that we're gonna put on as well. But for today, that's going to be it. Overall, I think it looks pretty good. Definitely sets up a lot higher. So yeah. What do you think, Lug? What do you think? Not impressed? Okay. See ya. Alright guys, so that's going to be it for today. Once again, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and we'll catch you next time. Peace!